My brother got the house, I got nothing. So I showed the IRS his gift from our parents. My parents called my brother a dreamer, and me reliable. So when my grandfather died, they gave the dreamer the family home and gave reliable me a box of old trinkets. They thought I would just quietly accept it like I always do. They didn't know their golden boy would get drunk and brag to his friends about the massive tax fraud they all committed to make it happen. They thought the rules were for other people. They're about to find out their boring accountant daughter is the one who is going to make them pay. Before I tell you how I turned the tax code into the most satisfying weapon imaginable, tell me in the comments. Have you ever been punished for being the responsible one in your family? I want to hear your stories. And if you believe that sometimes the best revenge is served cold and calculated, please consider subscribing. It helps more stories like this prove that the pen, or in my case the spreadsheet, is mightier than the sword. Now let me tell you how it all went down. The lawyer's office was cold. Not just in temperature but in that sterile, airless way that rooms dedicated to death and money always seem to be. We sat on stiff leather chairs that sighed every time you moved. My mother, Susan, clutching a tissue she didn't need. My father, Mark, looking stoic and important. My younger brother, Leo, scrolling restlessly through his phone. And me, Hannah, feeling like a ghost at my own family gathering. We were there for the reading of my grandfather's will. A man I had loved with a quiet, fierce devotion. A man whose final years I had almost single-handedly managed. My grandfather, Arthur, was a force of nature, but the last 2 years of his life had been a slow, cruel decline. It was me who had rearranged my entire life to be there for him. Every weekend, without fail, I would make the hour-long drive to his house, the house he had built with his own hands, the house that held every happy memory of my childhood. I did his grocery shopping, managed his endless pill schedule, and spent hours just sitting with him, listening to the same old stories he loved to tell. My parents were always too busy. Leo was always on the verge of his next big break. So the responsibility, as it always did in my family, fell to me, the reliable one. I did it without complaint because I loved him. I thought my family saw it as an act of love. I was about to learn they saw it as my designated function. The lawyer, a dry, humorless man named Mr. Gable, cleared his throat and began to read. The legalese was dense, but the core of it was simple. A few small bequests, some charitable donations, and then the main event, the house. And to my beloved grandson Leo, Mr. Gable read in a monotone, I bequeath my property at 142 Elm Street and all its contents, to do with as he sees fit, in the hopes that it will provide him the stability to pursue his dreams. The words hit me with a physical force. The house. The beautiful old house with the crooked porch swing and the rose bushes I had helped my grandfather prune every spring. The place where I had sacrificed hundreds of hours of my own life, my own youth, for his comfort. It was all going to Leo. Leo, who had visited his grandfather maybe 5 times in the last 2 years, each time staying just long enough to ask for a loan. Mr. Gable continued. And to my beloved granddaughter Hannah, he read, and I felt a foolish flicker of hope. I bequeath the contents of the cedar chest in the attic, in the hopes that she will treasure these memories of her grandmother as I have. He then pushed a small, dusty wooden box across the mahogany table towards me. And that was it. My inheritance. A box of my grandmother's old costume jewelry and yellowed photographs. I was stunned into silence, a roaring in my ears. I could feel Leo's triumphant, smug energy radiating from across the table. My father placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. It makes sense, Hannah, he said, his voice full of a false, placating wisdom. Leo needs a foundation. You've always been so good at landing on your feet. My mother, however, delivered the truly unforgivable blow. She leaned over, patting my hand with her perfectly manicured fingers, and said, her voice loud enough for the lawyer to hear, a performative whisper that was meant to sound kind but was dripping with condescension. It's for the best, dear. Leo has the big ideas. The vision. You have the sensible job. Some of us are built for dreaming and some of us are built to be reliable. Reliable. There was my entire identity in their eyes, summed up in one soul-crushing word. I wasn't their daughter. I was a utility. A safety net. A functionary whose purpose was to be stable and supportive so that their brilliant, chaotic son could be free to chase his whims. The love and sacrifice I had poured into my grandfather's care wasn't seen as a gift. It was seen as my job description. The will wasn't just an unequal distribution of assets. It was a public declaration of my worth in my own family. I was the foundation meant to be solid, unseen, and buried underground. Leo was the magnificent structure they wanted to build on top of me. I looked at the dusty box on the table in front of me. It was filled with memories, yes, but in that moment, it felt like a box of ashes. The ashes of my place in my own family. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. A cold, hard knot formed in the pit of my stomach. It was a feeling I had never experienced before. A quiet, clarifying rage. I nodded numbly, accepted their hollow condolences, and walked out of that cold office, leaving them to congratulate their golden boy on his new kingdom. I was just the reliable one after all. And I was about to show them just how reliable my memory and my grasp of the rules could be. Leo, never one for quiet contemplation or gratitude, decided the best way to honor our grandfather's memory was to immediately begin plans to liquidate it. The house, our family's history, was nothing more to him than a source of seed capital for his latest and most grandiose failure to be an influencer collective he was calling the Vibe Syndicate. The concept, as far as I could gather, involved renting a massive, soulless mansion in the hills and filling it with vapid, attractive people who would make videos about products no one needed. To fund this venture, he needed to sell the house and fast. But first he decided to throw a party. Goodbye to the old junk party, as he so charmingly put it. It was an invitation I fully intended to decline, but my mother called me, her voice a cocktail of manipulation and cheer. "Oh, Hannah, you have to come. It's a celebration of Leo's new chapter. Don't be a stranger to your own family." The unspoken threat was clear. My absence would be seen as bitterness, as proof of my unsupportive nature, further cementing my role as the difficult, sensible sister. So I went. The party was as awful as I had imagined. The beautiful old house was filled with Leo's friends, a loud, braying pack of sycophants who looked like they had all stepped out of the same Instagram filter. They draped their designer jackets over my grandmother's antique furniture and spilled expensive craft beer on the hardwood floors my grandfather had so lovingly polished. I felt like a tourist in my own past, watching strangers desecrate a holy site. I retreated to the kitchen, the one room that still felt like a sanctuary, and started mechanically washing the mountain of glasses piling up in the sink. It was there, hidden from view but with a clear line of hearing to the back porch where Leo was holding court, that I heard the conversation that would change everything. Leo was drunk, his voice loud and sloshed with arrogance, his words carrying clearly through the open screen door. "To the syndicate," one of his friends toasted, raising a bottle. "And to your new headquarters." Leo let out a loud, braying laugh. "Headquarters? Dude, this dusty old place? No way. This is just the seed money. We're selling this relic and getting a real mansion. With a pool. And a podcast studio." There was more laughter. Then another friend asked, "Dude, aren't you going to get slammed with inheritance tax on this place? A house like this has got to be worth a fortune." And then Leo, my brilliant visionary brother, delivered the monologue that would become his downfall. He lowered his voice into what he probably thought was a conspiratorial whisper, but was still loud enough for me to hear every single word. "Nah man, that's the beauty of it," he slurred, his voice thick with smug satisfaction. "My parents are smarter than that. We didn't do an inheritance. That's for suckers." He took a long, noisy gulp of his beer. "To avoid all the taxes, all the government nonsense, they officially gifted me the house last year. For my birthday. We signed all the papers, backdated a few things to make it look clean. It was a genius move. The will reading, that was just for show. You know, for my sister." He paused and I could practically hear the smirk in his voice. "My boring-as-dirt accountant sister," he continued, and the casual cruelty of it stole the air from my lungs. "She was probably in the next room balancing their checkbook at the time, has no idea. She lives her life by the book, you know? Thinks rules are for everyone. So cute." The group erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, dismissive sound that echoed in the quiet kitchen. They were laughing at me, at my life, at my core principles, at my trust. He wasn't just admitting to a crime. He was mocking my very identity, framing my responsibility not as a virtue, but as a kind of charming stupidity that made me easy to deceive. My hands, submerged in the warm, soapy water, grew cold. The clatter of the party, the thumping bass of the music, it all faded away into a dull, distant roar. All I could hear was his voice replaying in my head. "Boring as dirt accountant sister. Thinks rules are for everyone. So cute. The grief I had felt in the lawyer's office was gone. The sadness was gone. In their place, a feeling I had suppressed my entire life began to surface. It was a cold, hard, calculating rage. He was right about one thing. I was an accountant. I did live by the rules. And I knew the rules better than he could possibly imagine. And in that moment, standing in my grandfather's kitchen, I decided I was going to use those rules to burn his entire world to the ground. The party raged on outside, but inside me a quiet, methodical war had just been declared. The boring accountant was about to open up a new set of books. I left the party without saying goodbye to anyone. I drove home in a state of strange, hyper-focused calm. The roaring in my ears had subsided, replaced by a quiet, methodical clicking, like the gears of a complex machine turning into place. The emotional, heartbroken daughter had been pushed aside, and the cold, professional accountant had taken the wheel. My brother's cruel words hadn't just hurt me, they had given me a problem to solve. And I solve problems for a living. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of neat, orderly calm, felt like a command center. I went straight to my home office, a room where every file was labeled, every document digitized and backed up. For years, my parents had treated me as their pro bono financial organizer. "Oh, Hannah, you're so good with numbers, could you just look this over?" they'd say, handing me a shoebox full of crumpled receipts and threatening letters from the bank. I had spent countless hours sorting out their messy finances, creating spreadsheets, and digitizing their important documents for safekeeping. It was a thankless, unpaid job I did out of a misguided sense of familial duty. Now that thankless job was about to become my arsenal. I powered on my computer and navigated to a password-protected, encrypted hard drive tucked away in a desk drawer. I labeled it Family Financials. It contained years of their lives in neat digital folders. My hands were steady as I typed in the password, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. I was looking for proof of a crime committed by my own family against me. The search felt like a violation, an act of betrayal in itself, but their actions had left me no choice. I started with the most recent files from last year. I scrolled through bank statements, mortgage payments, and tax returns that I myself had helped them prepare. Then I saw it. A folder labeled Property Docs Elm St. My breath caught. I clicked it open. Inside was a single scanned PDF file. The file name was simple, Gift Deed. My blood ran cold. It was real. His drunken boast wasn't just empty talk. It was the truth. I opened the document. The language was cold, legal, and absolute. It was a quitclaim deed, transferring the full ownership of 142 Elm Street from my parents, Mark and Susan, to my brother Leo. And there, in the section for the sale price, were the words that sealed their fate. For the sum of $1, and other good and valuable consideration. This was the legal language for a gift. And right at the bottom, the date, over a year ago on Leo's birthday. The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. The entire will reading had been a piece of theater. A grotesque, elaborate performance designed to manage my reaction, to make me believe I was being denied an inheritance when, in fact, the property had already been given away behind my back. They hadn't just disinherited me, they had actively deceived me, constructing a false reality to keep me placid and compliant. The box of my grandmother's jewelry wasn't a meager inheritance. It was a prop in their play. I sat there staring at the screen, the glow of the monitor illuminating the silent, dark room. The depth of the betrayal was hard to comprehend. It wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about the years of my life, the weekends I had sacrificed, the love I had poured into caring for my grandfather in that very house. They had watched me do it, knowing all along that they had already signed it away to the son who couldn't be bothered to visit. They had let me scrub the floors and cook the meals in a house that, in their minds, already belonged to my brother. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt a profound sense of foolishness, of shame. How could I have been so blind? For years I had been the family's pillar, their reliable one. I had believed that my stability, my hard work, was a contribution they valued. I see now that they only valued it for what it could do for them and for Leo. I wasn't a pillar, I was a resource to be exploited. But as the initial shock and pain began to subside, it was replaced by something else. A cold, crystalline clarity. The accountant in me took over. This document wasn't just proof of their betrayal, it was evidence. It was a receipt for their crime. And every crime has a consequence. My family had made a very, very big mistake. They had forgotten who I was. I wasn't just the reliable daughter. I was a forensic accountant. And they had just handed me all the evidence I needed to conduct the most thorough and devastating audit of their lives. I saved a copy of the gift deed to a new encrypted thumb drive. I labeled it Project Retribution. The discovery was painful, yes. But it was also the beginning of my justice. The night I found the gift deed was the night the grieving daughter died and the forensic accountant was born. The hurt was still there, a hot aching coal in my chest, but it was now fuel. My mind, which had been reeling with emotional turmoil, sharpened to a razor's edge. My family had always mocked my obsession with rules and details. Now I was going to turn that obsession into a weapon of devastating precision. I didn't sleep. I spent the entire night in my home office, the glow of my dual monitors casting long shadows on the wall. This wasn't about family anymore. This was a case study in financial fraud, and I was the lead investigator. My first step was to establish the clear, undeniable value of the crime. I went to the county's public property records website and pulled the official tax assessment for my grandfather's house for the previous year, the year of the illegal transfer. The fair market value was listed at $975,000. Nearly $1 million. I saved a screenshot of the assessment, time-stamped and clear. That was my baseline. Next, I went to the one place my family had always feared and disdained, the official IRS website. I navigated to the section on gift tax. The language was dense, but to me it was as clear as poetry. I read every line, every publication, every FAQ. The rules they thought were for other people, were about to become their undoing. The law was unequivocal. A person could give a certain amount to another person each year without any tax implications. The annual exclusion. For the year in question, that amount was $15,000. Any gift above that amount required the giver, my parents, to file a Form 709, the United States Gift and Generation Skipping Transfer, tax return. The tax on the gifted amount above the exclusion was substantial, a percentage that climbed steeply with the value of the gift. My parents had gifted a property worth $975,000. They had 2 annual exclusions they could have combined for a total of $30,000. That left a taxable gift of $945,000. They had never filed Form 709. This was not an oversight. This was a deliberate act of tax evasion. But that was just the beginning. The real beauty, the real weapon was in the penalties. I opened a new Excel spreadsheet, the clean grid a soothing balm to my furious heart. I created a new file, Vance Family Tax Liability Analysis. With cold, methodical precision I began to build my case. Column A, Fair Market Value of Property, $975,000. Column B, Allowable Annual Exclusions, 2 donors minus $30,000. Column C, Taxable Gift Amount, $945,000. I pulled up the gift tax rate schedules. I calculated the initial tax liability. It was a staggering number well into the 6 figures. I entered it into column D. Then I moved on to the penalties. This was where my rage found its true bureaucratic expression. First, the penalty for failure to file. The IRS charges a percentage of the unpaid tax for each month the return is late, capped at 25%. I calculated it to the day. It was a beautiful, punishing number. Next, the penalty for failure to pay. Another percentage compounding monthly. I added a new line item, the numbers in the spreadsheet growing with a sickening, satisfying velocity. But the masterstroke was the fraud penalty. Since my brother had openly admitted to backdating documents, I could make a strong case that this wasn't mere negligence. It was intentional tax fraud. The penalty for fraud was a massive 75% of the underpayment. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the clicks a steady rhythmic drumbeat of retribution. Finally, I calculated the compound interest on the entire unpaid amount, the original tax plus all the penalties, from the date the tax was due until the present day. I sat back and looked at the final number at the bottom of the spreadsheet. It was highlighted in bold red. It was a life-ruining amount of money. It was more than the house was worth. To pay this debt, they would not only have to sell the house, but they would likely have to liquidate every other asset they had. their comfortable retirement, their social standing, their precious Vibe syndicate. All of it would be incinerated in the blaze of their own greed and stupidity. The knot of anger in my stomach began to unwind, replaced by a feeling of immense, terrifying power. They had left me with nothing. But my knowledge, my skills, my meticulous attention to the rules they disdained, that was my inheritance. They had handed me a box of worthless trinkets, but I had just discovered it contained a secret key. A key to a vault where their entire future was stored. And I was about to turn that key. The spreadsheet was complete. My case was airtight. The weapon was forged. Now all I had to do was fire it. With the calculations complete and the case built, the next phase of my plan required a different kind of precision, not mathematical but operational. This wasn't about confronting them. There would be no tearful showdowns, no angry accusations. That would give them the opportunity to gaslight me, to twist the narrative, to play the victims. No, my revenge would be silent, anonymous, and delivered by an entity far more powerful and unforgiving than I could ever be. The United States government. I spent the next day drafting the letter. I didn't write it as Hannah, the wrong daughter. I adopted a new persona. A concerned citizen with first-hand knowledge of a significant tax fraud scheme. My tone was dry, factual, and emotionless. I wanted it to read like a report from a disillusioned insider, not a cry for help from a family member. To the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, I began, I am writing to report a suspected case of fraudulent tax evasion concerning a high-value real estate transfer. I laid out the entire transaction with the dispassionate clarity of an audit report. I included the full legal names of my parents and my brother. I listed the property's official address and parcel number. I detailed the approximate date of the fraudulent gift transfer, cleverly framing it as something I had overheard from a party involved. I explained the scheme, how the family had intentionally structured the transfer as a gift to avoid taxes and then staged a phony will reading to conceal the true nature of the transaction from other family members. The centerpiece of the letter was my financial analysis. I didn't send them my whole spreadsheet as that might seem too personal, too professional. Instead, I summarized my findings in a neat, concise paragraph. The undeclared gift, valued at an approximate $975,000, would have incurred a substantial gift tax liability. The failure to file Form 709, combined with potential fraudulent intent, suggests a total tax underpayment, including penalties and interest, likely exceeding several $100,000. I urge you to investigate this matter to ensure the integrity of our tax system. I printed the letter on plain paper, using a generic font. I then gathered my supporting evidence: a clean copy of the gift deed, a printout of the county's property value assessment, and a few key articles about the IRS's aggressive stance on high-value gift tax evasion. I compiled it all into a neat package. There was nothing in it that could be traced back to me directly. It was a perfect, anonymous little bomb. The final step was the delivery. I knew I couldn't mail it from my local post office. My parents, in their inevitable panic, might try to trace its origin. This had to be a ghost's work. The following Saturday I got in my car and drove 2 towns over, to a bustling, anonymous suburb where I was just another face in the crowd. I found a large, impersonal post office. I walked inside, my heart a steady rhythmic drum against my ribs. I purchased a single plain manila envelope and a book of stamps. I didn't use the self-service kiosk. I went to a human clerk, paid in cash and made no small talk. I assembled the package in my car, my hands steady. I sealed the envelope. I wrote the address for the IRS's main processing center on the front in neat block letters. As I walked to the blue mailbox outside the post office, I felt the weight of the last 10 years on my shoulders. Every condescending remark, every overlooked achievement, every thankless task, it was all in this envelope. This wasn't just a letter. It was a reckoning. I paused for a moment, my hand hovering over the slot. This was the point of no return. Once this letter was sent, a chain of events would be set in motion that I could not stop. A part of me, a small foolish part that still mourned the family I wished I had, hesitated. But then I thought of my brother's cruel, laughing face at the party. I thought of my mother's condescending voice in the lawyer's office. Some of us are built to be reliable. As I was reliable. And I was about to reliably deliver the consequences they had so arrogantly believed they could escape. I pushed the envelope through the slot. It disappeared with a soft thud. I turned and walked back to my car without looking back. The bomb had been mailed. Now all I had to do was wait for the explosion. The silence that followed was the most peaceful 6 months of my life. It was a silence born of my own action. A quiet confidence that the gears of justice were now turning, slowly but inexorably. I went about my life. I excelled at work. I started dating again. I reconnected with old friends. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of my family's dysfunction. I had outsourced that burden to the federal government. Leo, in the meantime, was moving forward with his grand plans. He officially put our grandfather's house on the market. From what I heard through the family grapevine, he had accepted an all-cash offer well over asking price. He was already leasing a gaudy mansion in the hills for his Vibe Syndicate, and posting obnoxious videos of his new lavish lifestyle. He and my parents were on top of the world, convinced they had pulled off the perfect crime. They were celebrating a victory in a war they didn't even know they had lost. Then on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the phone call I had been waiting for finally came. It was my mother. I didn't recognize the number, but I recognized the sound of her voice. A high-pitched, hysterical shriek. "Hannah! Oh, thank God! Hannah, you have to help us." I held the phone slightly away from my ear, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. "Mom? What's wrong? You sound upset." "Upset? Upset?" she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "I'm beyond upset. We've received a letter, Hannah. A letter from the IRS. They're auditing us. A full audit. They're saying we committed fraud. They're asking about Grandpa's house, about a gift tax. They're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars." I let her frantic, rambling confession wash over me. It was even better than I had imagined. The anonymous tip had worked perfectly. The IRS had launched a full-scale investigation. "A gift tax?" I asked, my voice a perfect imitation of confused concern. "What gift are they talking about?" "The house," she sobbed. "We gave the house to Leo. They're saying we owe taxes and penalties and interest. Hannah, the number, it's everything. We'll be ruined. Leo will lose the house. We'll lose everything." And then came the moment I had been waiting for, the moment of pure, undiluted rage-bait gold. The moment where, after admitting to a massive financial crime, her panicked, desperate mind searched for someone to blame. And it landed, as it always did, on me. "This is your fault, Hannah," she shrieked, her grief instantly curdling into accusation. "You're the accountant. You manage our books. You must have missed something. You didn't file the right form, you didn't tell us about this. How could you be so careless? You were supposed to be handling this." I was silent. I let her accusation hang in the air, in all its spectacular, breathtaking hypocrisy. They had concocted a secret illegal scheme behind my back, lied to my face about it, and were now blaming me for the consequences of their own deliberate fraud. It was the most perfect, most complete distillation of my entire life with them. It was the final, defining data point in my audit of their souls. When I finally spoke, my voice was no longer the voice of their daughter. It was the voice of a creditor calling in a decade-old debt. It was as calm, cold, and clear as ice. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, the apology a sharp, glittering shard of glass. "I can't help you with this." "What do you mean you can't help me?" she cried. "You have to fix this. It's your job." "No," I said, and the word was a door slamming shut on a lifetime of servitude. "It's not my job. I'm not your accountant anymore. I'm not your safety net. You said it yourself, remember? In the lawyer's office." I paused, letting her remember the words she had used to dismiss me, the words I was now using to destroy her. "Some of us are built for dreaming and some of us are built to be reliable. And I've decided," I continued, my voice level and devastatingly final, "to be reliable to myself from now on. You told me Leo was the one with the big ideas. I'm sure he'll have a big idea for how to solve this." I heard a choked, sputtering sound on the other end of the line, a sound of pure, helpless rage. And then I hung up. I ended the call, and with it my role as the family's reliable daughter. I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, the rain streaking down the window panes. There was no triumph, no elation. Just a profound, quiet sense of balance. The books were finally closed. The debt had been paid. The boring accountant had just completed the most important audit of her life.